This was so tedious. Never do this. Because it's absolutely the most tedious thing I've ever done in my life.
So, you know that feeling when you put in a ridiculous amount of effort into something only for it to turn out mediocre? And also 5 months later, it becomes completely obsolete? Hi, I'm Grace. And last summer, I went completely mad in quarantine and did a bunch of genetic tests in The Sims. This was triggered because in 2017, I recreated a sim that I had originally made as a child and used to do the 100 baby challenge. The 100th child was born on my 24th birthday last year.
Ah, it's a girl.
We made it, boys.
We did it.
And I got to thinking, despite the fact I was having my sim literally just bang whoever happened to be walking by, all her kids turned out really, really similar. So I decided to do some genetic experiments just to get a taste of how the genetics functioned in the game. There's the whole story. You don't have to watch the first video now. One thing I do want to make clear is that I am kind of a dramatic bitch. This was maddening enough when I couldn't leave my house, but now that I'm actually working, this is the last thing I want to do after a long day at work. God, the woohooing goes on forever. And I swear the genetics tool in Create a Sim gets slower and slower the longer you use it. But despite all that, I am glad that the skin tones got updated. Really, it's about damn time. So this is what the skin tones looked like at launch. Barely anything, and way more lighter tones than darker tones. In 2018, they added 10 more of the natural skin tones, bringing the total to 26, along with some more rainbow colored and gray based ones. Most of the additions to the natural shades were darker, which was good, but they were also pretty dull looking, and were also covered in orange splotches and discolorations. This was called out pretty immediately, but they were just straight up not fixed, and that's just how it was for a while. Around August of 2020, a few big simmers started talking about the tones. They were definitely not the first to do so, but this was notably when EA finally said, yes, we'll do something about this. Funny that there was a semi-update in October of 2020 where they were supposed to have fixed the splotches, but based on the fact that I found multiple videos about the fact that nothing had been changed, I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say it wasn't exactly substantive. But then, the full update came in December 2020. We went from 26 natural shades to 135, categorized into warm tones, cool tones, and neutral tones. And they all have little individual sliders that let you adjust the colors to your liking. I don't know why they didn't just have 3 big sliders like how they did in The Sims 3, but whatever, I don't make games. So I wasn't actually playing The Sims at all while this was all going on because I was starting a new job and also working on that godforsaken cats video. But I was keeping an eye on it for YouTube and Twitter, which is how I came across this tweet right here. Seems that genetics has a bit of an issue. I went to the actual video he was referencing there and...
Okay, so let's randomize the kids. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no.
The Sims actually responded and fixed this pretty quickly, but this was the moment I knew I had to come back and finish what I had started. Saying that like this is a cool thing and not a Sims video, okay? And, you know, I did kind of get annoyed that my old genetics video is only a few months old and is now defunct, but this is good. It's good they are making updates to this stuff. It seems like lately they've been making updates where they've been adding things that should have been in the game in the first place. Okay, look, I'm sorry, but how does it take you 6 years to add fear, a basic human emotion, to a game where the selling point was the emotions?
For the first time ever, we've designed our Sims with emotions. These emotions allow you to drive how these new Sims move, feel, and experience life.
I was way too nice in the old video. I was strictly sticking to the results and nothing more, and at the time I was thinking that I should stay in my own lane, but no. That was wrong. I should have called out the old skin tones for what they were. Garbage. And you know what? Let's do just that right now. Because I am in a unique position where I could actually do that. So unfortunately, in December, my external hard drive decided to die. Just die. I lost everything. It was a freaking miracle I got the Warriors folder out. That would have been a disaster, but it does mean that every screenshot, video, and save file I have from the last video is gone. I obviously still have what's up on YouTube, but I also have the Sims I made since they're all in my library, and all my Google Docs and charts where I documented all their information. So all these Sims in my library, I know what their exact skin tone was before the update. So this is Brandon and Alyssa, one of the 4 couples I used in the last video to determine what the average skin tone was if the darkest shade and the lightest shade reproduce, meaning these two represent the 2 sides of the old palette. So putting them into Create a Sim now, we see that Alyssa is still the lightest shade and has been categorized into warm, and that Brandon is not the darkest anymore, which hey, that means they added newer darker shades. That's good, but cool? He's a cool shade? Now, I don't really know the extent of the changes. They might have completely redid all the old skin tones and they're just randomly sticking the formerly darkest one somewhere dark because they don't have that shade anymore. But I do have 3 other couples that serve the exact same function, and nope, it's the exact same thing. The lighter sim is always the first one in the warm category, and the darker sim is always the 35th shade in the cool category. Let's see how far we can go with this, shall we? Because I did all these tests where I moved the 2 sims closer and closer to the middle. So I started with a couple that are the first in the 26th shades, and then the second in the 25th, and then the third and the 24th, etc. And going through all of them, the darker shades are all cool, the lighter shades are all warm, and some of the mid-tones fall into neutral. For transparency's sake, I didn't have an 11 sim, but the 10, 12, and 13 are all warm, so I'm just gonna make an educated guess here. And unfortunately, I didn't have any sims who fell between 13 and 17, so I have no idea at what point the skin tones became neutral, which is so annoying, but I was able to determine that 1 through 13 are all warm, 17 through 19 are all neutral, and 20 through 26 are all cool. And here's where the old shades fall on the newer palette. The cools and neutrals are all over the place, but the warms are almost exactly in their old positions, aside from 4 and 7 being swapped, and again, I don't know about 11. But aside from that, it looks like the warms were left almost exactly as they were, and the new tones were placed behind them. I guess supposedly because they had the light warm tones all set and just needed to make some darker ones. So, this is kind of damning, right? I mean, literally, if anyone ever rolled their eyes at the complaints against the darker shades, well, here it is. The devs did color the darker shades differently from the lighter shades. Now, this is pretty standard in the real world makeup industry, that more often than not the darker shades of makeup tend to be based towards more cool tones, which not only makes it difficult for people with darker skin to match their tone, but also makes people with warmer and more neutral tones look gray and ashy. I know it's probably unnecessary to harp on this since it has been fixed, and I have seen it expressed that, oh, what does it matter that it took 6 years? It's fixed now, why complain? But what you need to understand is that 6 years is longer than any of the previous game's runs. The Sims came out in 2000, The Sims 2 came out in 2004, The Sims 3 in 2009, and The Sims 4 in 2014. Each of the previous game's runs lasted, on average, about 5 years. And they were all able to create a full experience in that time. Why is The Sims 4 struggling to put even the most basic ideas into their game when they've had more time than any of the others. And I do want to make it clear that this is a complaint against EA, the company. I agree that going after individual sim gurus is wrong, since they clearly aren't the ones calling the shots.
So that doesn't excuse zero swatches on our line. It's like,
No, for sure. That's a weird one, actually.
Like-
I don't know why we would do that either. I'm sure there's a reason.
I'm telling you, all the things that the players say, we're like, yeah, we really want to do that also, but
And then you're like, ooh.
it takes time.
Yeah.
But EA, the company, doesn't have feelings. They obviously only really care about their bottom line, and something fishy is definitely going on behind the scenes that it took, what, 3 years to add toddlers? And that there's a color wheel for pets, but not Sims?
Yeah, so if I design sort of my perfect version, it's something more like that, where I get to design the different pieces, but then there's a little more flexibility. Maybe not the whole color wheel, but like a little more of a spectrum.
Yeah, you know, like you open up like a photo editing program that has like a set
Yes.
number of like standard color swatches.
Or
yeah.
like a hue shifter, right, which you can do too. And I feel like there's that middle zone that would feel better. Now, how could that ever exist in Sims 4? It can't, which I know is not the fun answer.
Now, granted, it does look like they finally did do something about the splotches. I mean, look, this sim had shade 24 and had very clear discoloration between her eyebrows. It becomes even more obvious if you brighten the image. So I took my old sim who I made with the same skin tone, and yeah, it looks like the discoloration is gone. Here's Brandon again. He represents what used to be the darkest shade, and there's no splotches between his eyes. He's a lot lighter around his mouth though, which maybe that's for shading reasons, but there's an extremely clear line here. Speaking of the shading, every sim has a lighter spot on their nose. It's obviously just supposed to be a highlight, but it looks terrible on certain shades. There's also a really obvious line on the sim's cheek. Yeah, there's still a lot of issues, but it's good that they at least cleaned up the splotches. It took them years to do it, but it would have been really shitty if they released this whole big skin tone update and didn't fix the ones they already had. They also added sliders to the makeup. I assume to try and quell the controversy that their makeups don't look as good on darker skin tones, although that doesn't really fix the ones from Mac. I don't even really wear makeup in real life, but like, oh my god. They also updated a couple of hairstyles, which is cool, but it's also the extent of what they did to the hair. I didn't bring it up before, but they don't have my hair color. I don't have bright yellow hair, but this is about the closest to light brown as I could get. And it isn't just that either. Why are there only 2 options for dark hair? And why does the black look so blue? I guess you can count the black with the gray streaks as a dark hair color. I really don't, because that's clearly just intended for players to use when their Sims get older, and it functions similar to the rainbow hair colors, in that toddlers and children can't have it, so they just have a random hair color until they age up into their teens. A fun thing I noticed is that when you age up a toddler who was supposed to have colorful hair and create a sim, their facial hair doesn't change until you click on the traits. And there is also the glitch where sometimes they keep what is supposed to be their temporary color when they age up. This happens more than you'd probably think, and while in the first video I stated I didn't think it happened in Create a Sim, this time around it actually did. Several times, in fact. So yes, either way you go about it, your Sims kids could just end up with a completely different hair color. I find this just completely baffling. Like, why can't they just make green and pink swatches for kids and toddlers? What's the difference? Same thing with babies, honestly. The babies who are supposed to have a red skin tone have a brown skin tone, and the babies who are supposed to be light blue are white. It is fixed when they're aged up, but again, I have to ask the question, why didn't you just make swatches for the babies? Granted, they fixed the onesies and got rid of that god-awful red overlay. Yeehaw to that. But look, the babies that are supposed to be light blue are white, but their icon is a darker shade of brown. And I went back and checked my old video, and nope, the icons did not look like that last July. In fact, babies that were straight up blue had their own icons, but now I guess they're broken. Same thing with the green babies too. I also noticed this in my saves I use when I don't actively hate myself. Here is the love child between Travis Scott and Nancy Landgrab, and here's what he looks like in the family family tree. The eyes are still broken too. I made 2 Sims with light brown eyes, and more than half of their kids ended up with hazel eyes instead. And if your Sim has the hazel color, they will have a 50-50 chance of inheriting the light brown. They are completely interchangeable. Same thing with these 2 blue colors and the pink and red eyes. The weird little quirks I mentioned last time are still there too. A lot of the boys age up into the same red shirt, green pants combo, and I noticed that girls often aged up into this yellow shirt, blue flower pants outfit. It's less common, but it happens enough that I noted it down, so hey. And if you age up twins and create a Sim, a lot of the time they had the same hair and facial hair. I didn't dive into it at all last year, but it does kinda look like it only happens with identical twins, since in every instance I have of this, the twins have the same hair, eye, and skin color. I don't think it matters at all, it's just a cute little quirk, I don't know. Also, freckles still aren't genetic. Kinda crazy that you could draw markings on cats and dogs and those carry over onto their offspring.
They both have afraid written on them.
But freckles don't. Okay, that's it. Let's actually get into the experiments now. 4 pages into the script, oh my god. Alright, so the main experiment is basically the same as before, with a few minor adjustments. I numbered each shade 1 to 45, and made 1 Sim with a 1 shade and 1 Sim with a 45 shade. I used the genetics tool and create a Sim to make them 50 kids who got immediately deleted, rest in peace, and then had them have 50 babies in-game. Well, actually, I usually had them have 51 or 52 because I'm bad at taking screenshots. Since the max amount of Sims you could have in a household at one time is 8, I had the parents have 6 babies and then age them up to toddlers. And from there, I took them into Create a Sim, aged them up to young adults, and then sent them off to live with another family to make room for the next 6 kids. After that, I wrote down which skin tone they got and then averaged the results. Since each tone consists of 45 shades, in theory, if the game chose a skin tone that was exactly in the middle, the average would be 23. And if not, we'd be able to see how much higher or lower it is. Now, obviously, some tones that have a lower number are actually darker than those that come after it, but the overall trend is that the higher the number, the darker the shade. So that's how we're going to be looking at it. Now, obviously, since there are 3 different tones now, I had to split the experiments up into different categories. To start off, we're going to do 3 tests in the warm tone, and then 3 tests in the cool tone, and then 3 tests in the neutral tone. So that's 9 tests in total, with each test consisting of about 50 kids in-game and about 50 kids in Create a Sim. So, 900 kids in total. For transparency's sake, I barely have any expansion packs, barely any CC, and the only mod I have in the game is the Master Controller, which was crucial because it allowed me to speed up the pregnancies. But the pregnancies are all conceived in-game. I did not use the mod to make anyone pregnant, and I did not use it to increase the number of babies they had at once. Although I did give the parents the fertile trait. Didn't help much though. I got so bored watching them woohoo. I have so much footage of me just trying to line up the pause menu at the bottom of the bed.
Brinka Pogan.
Alright, so here's the results. For warm, the averages for Create a Sim were 24.06, 21.73, and 22.63, and the total average was 22.81. The averages in-game were 22.26, 21.06, and 22.63, with the total being 21.98. Averaging those together, the total average for the warm tone is 22.4. For cool, we got 23.37, 23.45, and 21.41 in Create a Sim, with the average being 22.74. And in-game, we got 22.43, 21.84, and 23.22, with the average being 22.5. The total average for the cool tone is 22.62. And finally, for neutral, in Create a Sim, we have 20.42, 23.79, and 24.18, with the average being 22.8. And in-game, we have 23.8, 23, and 20.98, with the average being 22.59. The total average for neutral is 22.7. So the total average for all free tones is 22.57, which is really close to the middle, but still skewing on the lighter side, which is actually how it was before the update. There were only 26 shades at the time, the middle was 13 or 14, and I didn't actually do a total average in the last video, but the average for Create a Sim was 11.24, and the average for in-game was 11.44, so the total average would be 11.34. So yes, it skewed lighter, but the difference here is that before the update, there was only a limited amount of shades that even ever popped up. Despite the parents having the biggest scale between them that was possible at the time, nearly every single one of their children had the shades 12, 13, 4, 6, and 19. And the 4s and the 6s were definitely what was dragging the average down. Because when I did the middling tests, once I got to 7 and 20, which was the first test out of the range of 4 and 6, the average shot way up. This isn't really a thing after the update. There is a much higher variety of shades this time around, although interestingly enough, some shades pop up much more often than others, depending on what tone you use. The most common warm shades that came up in this experiment were 28, which came up 37 times, 33, which came up 28 times, 25, which came up 68 times, and 17, which came up 83 times. The most common shades for cool are 21, which came up 68 times, 22, which came up 58 times, and 9, which came up 51 times. And the most common shades in neutral are 12, which came up 46 times, 24, which came up 38 times, 20, which came up 70 times, and 23, which came up 36 times. It's also worth noting that 17, which was the most common warm shade, didn't pop up a single time for cool. So yeah, for all intents and purposes, the free tones do actually function somewhat differently. The obvious next step here is to repeat the same experiments as before, except to combine the different tones. So I did 2 tests for warm and cool, and then 2 tests for neutral and cool, and then finally 2 for warm and neutral, using the same method of one parent has the darkest shade and one parent has the lightest shade. And I switched off for each test. So I do both warm as a lighter shade and cool as a darker shade, and then cool as a lighter shade and warm as a darker shade. So here are the results. For the warm-cool combo, the averages for the lighter warm darker cool tests are 22.29 in Create a Sim and 19.94 in-game. And for the lighter cool darker warm test, it's 23.16 for Create a Sim and 22.53 for in-game. The total average is 21.98. For the cool neutral combo, the averages for the lighter cool darker neutral tests are 23.45 for Create a Sim and 23.75 in-game. And for the lighter neutral darker cool tests, they're 24.14 for Create a Sim and 23.52 in-game. The total average is 23.72. And for the warm neutral combo, the averages for the lighter neutral darker warm tests are 22.26 for Create a Sim and 24.57 in-game. And for the lighter warm darker neutral tests, they're 22.37 for Create a Sim and 22.88 in-game. The total average is 23.02, and the overall total average for all 3 of these is 22.9. So yeah, it lines up pretty well with the first round of tests. Overall, the genetics work the same whether you're staying within one tone or using 2. Except you might have noticed that one of the averages was weirdly kinda low. Yeah, the one in-game where the warm tone was at 1 and the cool tone was at 45. The average is below 20. This is the only average in any of the tests I did that got that low. This immediately struck me as odd, and after I started documenting all the data, I noticed that this was the only test so far where the Sims were having babies with their exact skin tone. Yeah, no, seriously, in every other test, the offspring were always somewhere in between their parents, but in this test, they were having kids that are the cool 45 skin tone and the warm 1 skin tone. The warm 1 skin tone was especially especially prominent, which is why the average got dragged down so much. I wasn't sure what to think about this, to be honest. I mean, it wasn't just the combination of warm and cool that did it, because the lighter cool and darker warm test did not behave this way. It was only when the warm was lightest and the cool was darkest. So I did the experiment again. One sim with the warm 1 shade, one sim with the cool 45 shade. 50 kids in Create a Sim, 50 kids in-game, and the same thing happened. They had kids with their exact skin tones, and a lot of the kids had the lightest warm shade. The average didn't get quite as low this time, only getting to 21.08, and the Create a Sim average got weirdly high at 24.42, but I think that's because it got a bunch of the cool 45s. Wow, I hate how that sounds. I'm sorry, this video's really confusing to write.
What?
Nevertheless, the fact that this happened twice shows that this was a weird-ass quirk of the genetic system. The only reason I could think of that this particular pairing would work differently is, well, warm being light and cool being dark was the default, as established earlier. But I don't know, it still seems kind of weird that it would be like this even if they had that bias, but what do I know? Nothing. I don't know anything about coding. I'm just pointing out this is a thing. A weird thing, but like, I don't have any solutions. The only other thing I have to say in this regard is that generally the ratio between the tones is pretty close to even. Don't get me wrong, it was never 50-50 or anything, but they were all within close enough range that I can't really say one tone is dominant over the other, except for the one warm 45 cool. In this case, the cool was always pretty noticeably dominant. Again, I don't know what this means, I'm just the messenger. Let's move on now. To sliders! Ooh, this is where I hit a wall. So I made one parent with the lightest skin tone and one parent with the darkest, and then moved the slider all the way to the left. The idea was that I would compare the averages with the sliders to the averages without the sliders, only to realize that was impossible because the tones weren't showing up on the chart. They weren't there at all. I couldn't see where they were, and I didn't even have the option to save the tone the child inherited. Although when I closed out of Create a Sim and opened it up again, it had saved it for me, so that was nice of them. What I'm assuming is happening here is that the tones are all slid to the left, just like their parents, and that the game just doesn't have a good way to show that, since when you click on your Sim's skin tone, even if you already moved the slider, it just resets back to the middle. I wish you could just click on it and the slider would stay in the position you placed it in. Like, it just seems kind of inconvenient if you wanted to nudge it slightly and then suddenly you lost where you were. I did have a solution to this problem. So you have the option to save shades you edit with the slider, and joke's on me though, because the game only lets you save 36 shades per tone, and reminder, there's 45 shades per tone. So yeah, there were quite a few sims where I couldn't see what their shade was, so there was no accurate way to take the average. I'm a failure, I'm sorry. Here's everything I can tell you about the sliders though. Every single shade has a slider, even the rainbow tones and the gray base shades. Sliding it to the left typically darkens it, and sliding it to the right typically lightens it. Two parents set to the left have kids who are also on the left, and two parents set to the right have children who are on the right. Oh my god, this sounds like I'm talking about politics. I'm not, I promise. Please don't leave. However, if two parents have the exact same skin tone and one parent is set to the left and the other is set to the right, every single one of their children will have the default shade. I assume this is because, like when two parents with vastly different shades have children, the game is trying to stick to the middle, and the default is the slider being in the middle. It makes sense, and it applies if the parents have different shades too. As you can see from this mini test, the game chooses shades that were between the two parents. It appears to work the same way when the parents have different tones. The exception here is if the sliders are uneven, like one shade is closer to the middle than the other. The kids seem to get a custom tone, and I know that because I can't see where they fall in the chart. There's also this weird thing I didn't notice till later. Sorry if the audio here sounds different, this is a later day, but if one parent has the lightest shade and one parent has the darkest shade, and one is set to the left and the other is set to the right, then the children don't get the default shade. which is odd that if the parents both have middle shades, then the kids get the default shades, but if they have the lightest and darkest, they don't? I don't know. I find the sliders extremely overwhelming to deal with, so I'm just gonna move on to the genders, or the sexes, I guess, but I'm gonna talk about the genders too. Now, The Sims 4 is the first Sims game to offer anything in terms of custom gender settings. I wasn't super tuned into the Sims community until a year or so ago, so I don't know what the reaction to these were, but I definitely saw people claim EA was pushing SJW propaganda when Island Living came out and it turned out you had to clean up the island. And my dudes, the time to complain about that was 2010 when Ambitions was released with the eco-friendly trait. And then they also had like pride stuff, and you know, I initially thought the pride stuff was just a stupid way to try and earn brownie points with the gays. But then I saw just how many flags there were, and I don't know, it made me feel something. Like someone actually gave enough of a shit to research this, and I don't know, that meant something to me. And I bet these gender settings meant something to a lot of people too. I don't know if they're all encompassing per se, and unfortunately the way I mostly use them was so that the mother in my 100 baby challenge could get impregnated by everyone, and I do mean everyone. I impregnated her. I thought it would be meaningful. It was not. It was kind of weird, actually. I'm not the right person to be talking about this. I guess it is kind of worth noting, though, that no Sim is actually born with the custom gender settings. Babies are still either assigned boy or girl at birth, and if you want to mess with that later, you have the option, but it's something you have to opt into. And I was kind of curious about the ratio, you know? Like, whether it was more common to have boys or girls, or if it's completely equal. And I do have a large sample size to pull from. Even if we just focus on the Sims born in-game, we have 1,308. And half the babies were made in Create a Sim, so double that if you want to know how many Sims I made for this. I remember last year fellow YouTuber Katie Louie, you should go check her out, she's pretty cool. But she told me that I did the 1,000 baby challenge, and boy, yeah, that's, yeah, God, what am I doing with my life? But yeah, after having such a good time going through all the Sims, I finally determined that it's basically 50-50, which is the most boring way this could have turned out. There is a slight skewing towards girls, but just barely. It was 668 girls and 640 boys. So yeah, it's only a difference of 28. It's not really a significant difference. Now, of course, these are just my results, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot of other weird things floating around I can't test because I barely have any expansion packs. I don't have pets. I don't have aliens. I thought about messing around with mermaid genetics, but ugh. I've had enough, honestly, and the only reason I'd ever make another video like this is if they ever do a complete overhaul of the genetics again, which I doubt will ever happen. Maybe someday they'll fix the hairs, I don't know. Or if The Sims 5 ever comes out, which probably isn't anytime soon. I remember in 2019 I was waiting for the announcement of The Sims 5 because that was the 5-year mark right there, but they just ended up rebranding instead. And I think at this point it's in development. I think I saw that it was, you know, that it's gonna be online based, which I'm gonna be honest, I don't really have positive feelings about that. But whatever. If anyone wants to repeat this experiment, you are more than welcome. I can't imagine you'd ever want to, but hey, 2600 baby challenge, gotta bump up the difficulty. Thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go play a normal Sims game now. Like and subscribe. This is the 3rd time I've recorded this video. Yep, cool. Thanks, bye.